succeed in overseas markets, powered by AIHK. 今日 Aspire Stage 最後一節嘅圓桌討論主題咧係 The AI Sovereignty Divide: What Asian AI Companies Must Do to Succeed in Overseas Market 係由 AIHK 支持㗎。我哋將會一齊去探討一下亞洲 AI 企業拓展海外市場面對嘅關鍵議題。This is an English discussion on global expansion, compliance, and market strategy. And you may now scan the QR code on screen if you need a real-time AI transcription service provided by VOTI Limited. 呢一個環節將會以英文進行，有需要嘅話，我哋嘅來賓可以用電話掃描一下熒光幕上嘅二維碼，就可以獲得由 VOTI Limited 提供嘅即時 AI 語音轉文字服務，獲得英文、繁體中文同埋簡體中文嘅即時文本。Now everyone, let's warmly invite our moderator, Mr. Neil Tan, Chairman AIHK, to the stage. 各位掌聲歡迎。And our panel speakers, Ms. Janet Kim, Partner Cooley LLP, Mr. Rocky Moy, Partner Clifford Chance, Mr. Greg Sinclair, Partner Control Risk and Co-Chair Cybersecurity and Quantum Committee AIHK, as well as Mr. Will Powell, Partner Cooley LLP. Welcome everyone on stage. And if everyone is ready, I will leave it to your good hand, Mr. Tang. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to this fantastic panel that we have set up today. Today we're actually going down the road of AI sovereignty. So a little bit of background, myself, I'm the founder and also chairman of AIHK. So Artificial Intelligence Association of Hong Kong is essentially the center of excellence for AI inside of Hong Kong. So we've got 50 AI experts inside of the association and leadership, and we also have two different councils. One is a Women's Council, and the second one is a AI Safety and Governance Council. So today what the topic is for this panel is AI Sovereignty Divide: What Asian AI Companies Must Do to Succeed in Overseas Markets. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers from US and also from Hong Kong. Before we begin, a little bit of background on this particular subject. So AI is no longer just about innovation, it's about jurisdiction. As the EU enforces sweeping AI laws and the US deregulates at home while tightening national security controls, the global landscape is splitting fast with no unified playbook. For Asian companies, this means navigating two opposing systems, each demanding different legal, technical, and geopolitical strategies. This panel breaks down what is actually taking place to operate across both, from compliance and data localization to market access and risk. And if you're building across borders, this is your reality. So without further ado, let's start off with an introduction, maybe starting off with Janet.
Hello. Hi there. My name is Janet Kim. I'm a partner at Cooley LLP. I sit in Washington, D.C., and I'm navigating tech regulatory investigations and outreach in jurisdictions like the European Commission, Ireland, as well as in the United States.
Hi all, I'm Rocky Moy, partner of Clifford, a law firm. I've been with CC for 20 years, and myself, I cover financial regulatory and also fintech in Hong Kong. And of course, AI is one of the hottest topic in a lot of our clients, whether it's financial institutions or corporate groups. It's a particular area they're looking into. So looking forward to the discussion.
And I'm Greg Sinclair. I'm the partner with Control Risk. I've been in cybersecurity and digital risk for over 30 years. I'm based in Hong Kong here. Part of what we do is look at how our clients are protecting themselves from a technology risk standpoint. Obviously, AI is one of the primary sources of concern currently. I also am the co-chair of the AI Hong Kong Cybersecurity and Quantum Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Will Powell. I'm a partner at Cooley with Janet. I'm also the co-head of our AI task force at the firm. And what that means is I coordinate our AI practice across our various practice groups. And and help lead our AI efforts across the firm. I also do substantial work here in Asia. I come here very frequently, and in the last couple of months, I've been here almost every month. And so I work extensively with AI companies both in the US and here in Asia.
Fantastic. So I think what we're going to be focusing on is two different areas. One is the regulatory fragmentation and compliance strategy, and the second is data sovereignty and security and infrastructure. So, the first question actually goes to Janet. The EU AI Act is risk-based and prescriptive, while the US is increasingly sectoral and enforcement-driven. So it's quite different between these two. And if you had to design a single global compliance architecture, what breaks first? And where do companies tend to underestimate hidden conflicts?
Thank you for the question. I think the thing that breaks first is launch velocity. And so the analogy that I sometimes use to talk about it with clients is, in the European Union, you are building an AI system like you are building a car. So you are documenting extensive thinking on your safety design. You are proving up that your systems are operating as intended. And when you make a meaningful change to the system, you pull it off the market and you start all over again with that regime of kind of documenting a thoughtful and systemic approach to risk mitigation. In the United States, it is much more of a regulation of the driver. And so if an accident occurs, there is significant inquiry into what the driver was doing, the driver's state of mind. And in the United States, interestingly, I think the largest number of product changes I'm seeing, not just in the AI space, but in tech in general, are being driven by lawsuits. And so the fact that the plaintiffs in the recent lawsuit against some social media companies were successful in winning a jury verdict meant that companies undertook product changes that they had been resisting for many years in the context of regulation. To go back to the engineering velocity point, a system that wants you to document all of your mitigation design and decision on the front end is not inherently compatible with a system that then wants to inquire as to your state of mind and the outcome of the system. And so, I think the way that I have seen this solved in a lot of companies looking to scale is thinking about a common corpus of facts and processes, and then engineering documentation in a different way for different jurisdictions. Another thing that I have seen is modular product launches as actually a feature. So this is something that is increasingly popular given how prescriptive the European regime is, but companies will choose to launch last in Europe. So they'll launch in other jurisdictions first, and then they will bring the launch to Europe. And it turns out this is not an unfavorable position for European regulators who see that launches in other markets at scale actually prove to be very good red teaming for what is and is not working about the AI system when it's in actual use. So
EU is basically the gold standard in terms of regulatory. They're the toughest market that you could actually imagine to try to enter. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. For launches especially, there is a lot of paperwork to be filed, boxes to be ticked, and systems to be evidenced and audited.
So red team through other markets like easier, and then kind of build up before you actually hit the EU, right?
And then explain that approach as a positive, as like a feature of your compliance design and not a bug to the European regulators.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of a story that you tell. I mean, not that you're making up a story, but there's a storyline to this sort of getting regulatory approval.
I think all regulatory interaction, especially before it gets contentious, is about narrative and about explaining to the regulator how you are managing to fulfill their purposes while also serving some of your own needs.
Yeah, and so it's like applying to Harvard. What's your story? Like, how do you get, that type of thing? Greg, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I love the vehicle analogy. I think there's a lot to think about there because it is like building a car in some ways. Looking at different jurisdictions, one of the key things that I hope an Asian-based AI company would do is to kind of look at the safety features of the vehicle, the chassis, if you will, seat belts, brakes, the roll cage. I'm not a car expert, but kind of build all that base core capability in the kind of the fundamental building blocks of what it is that you're doing and what you're taking to market, and then look at what specific regional attributes do I need to apply on top of that to bolt on to satisfy local jurisdictional or risk as it evolves and changes in terms of technology. I think one of the things that is very clear is that it's not policy that breaks first; it's the operational, the operational expectations.
So, on the same, similar, taking a little bit of a pivot, but, Rocky, we're talking about a lot of Asian firms looking at compliance layering, right? And that's meeting the strictest regime and applying it globally. So a little bit more over-engineered, if you will, right? And that being the safest route. But in practice, where does the strategy actually fail commercially or legally in that situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so looking at that, I think just before I go into the details, I think it's I'll give you a bit more flavor as to what we're looking at in Hong Kong. That sets the context, because hearing what's in the US, what's in Europe. Now, Hong Kong, what I'll call like more a context-based AI regulation approach is we still use our existing laws. So we don't have a new ordinance, we don't have a new law that just governs AI. How we do it is we regulate through regulated entities. So the banks, which we have the HMA, the securities brokers, asset managers, we have the SFC, we have the insurance companies, insurance authority, different industry, regulated industry. The regulators will come out with the AI guidelines, requirements, clarifications. So for regulated industries, if you are not regulated, just an ordinary business, right now in Hong Kong, it's more about the PDPO, so the personal data ordinance. We have the commission giving out guidelines about compliance, so it's more from a data perspective that we need to look out for things. Of course, there are general kind of anti-fraud and also IP laws, etc. But it's not really, if you're not a regulated person or entity, there's no specific AI law that applies to you. Obviously, you still have some other indirect ones that you need to look out for. So that's where Hong Kong stands. So if we look at the actual question, okay, when I need to expand or come to Hong Kong or vice versa, building a compliance framework, we help clients all the time on this. And it's not just on AI as well. It's just whatever the operations is. It could be just marketing of funds. It could be selling insurance policy, or I want to do money lending, money remittance, regulated or not. Whenever we go to new jurisdictions, we need to look at whether we activate, before we activate that jurisdiction, we ought to think about, if I'm going to do this there in another jurisdiction, what are the laws I need to comply? What are the licenses I need to apply for? And then it's more, if you ask the regulators, they will expect, okay, let's do a switch-on approach. Okay, you ask, you work things out, you do the right thing, and then you switch on the business. Now, a lot of time is depends on what sort of businesses. If it's obviously not regulated, then a lot of the time is you do the switch off. So you go do your business. Okay, there's something new. Okay, I'll switch it off. Okay, or I'll fix things up. So if we actually setting a compliance standard, looking at different areas, one concept is, okay, I take the highest standard that I just apply globally. So I must be compliant with everything. That's very fair. That's the kind of the golden standard. And a lot of the banks, the heavily regulated global groups, some of them will take that approach. But it also depends on the topic area. For AI, not an issue, but it's all relative. It's if the regulations, there is actually kind of gaps, or one's higher than the other, very comparable, then that makes sense because it's incremental. Okay, I'll just do more. But there will be regulations that are incompatible from a framework perspective. So I mentioned before in Hong Kong, it's context-based by regulations. Look at the EU, there is a specific AI Act, and it applies cross-sector. So it's not apple to apple. So if I want to build the highest standard, then if I follow the EU and when I want to launch in Hong Kong, then it takes a lot more time, resources, analysis to get it going. So it impact deployment time and resources. And if I apply the golden standard highest in the world, but then we are facing competition from local players, then maybe our products or service offerings may be more limited or has a more defined parameters. But our competitors, just looking at the local requirements, they may have a more flexibility in terms of what they do, how they provide the services. So a competitive consideration will be there. So I think all in all, it's not easy. Even if we have the golden standard, our financial institution clients, they need to localize it eventually because there will be some parts that needs to be localized. There will be laws that's about kind of trade restrictions. You have other local requirements. So ultimately, building a global one-size-fits-all requirements, I think that's a big ask, in particular for AI. But for setting the overall policy, the principles, we talk about governance, the accountabilities, those high-level principles, it's across different jurisdictions, it's very common. All the regulators, all the laws are looking at that. That, I think, at a higher policy level, we can do that. But when we get to the actual implementation, developing the product and services, I think it's more, the trend will be more a regional approach, which makes more sense.
Is there a lot more flexibility? I mean, just give an example, a car, maybe in one jurisdiction you drive at 50 km, it's got to be crash test, safe. Another one is 100. I mean, do you engineer it for the 100 or the 50? I mean, how would you?
Yeah, ideally, if the regulations are you drive 100 or drive 50, then that is good. That's the incremental I mentioned about. But now it's really the law. Okay, one is about speed limit. The other is, okay, you can only drive EV, but not gasoline cars.
Got it. Will, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really is the problem because we have a lot of clients that come to us and they talk about compliance layering and they think, of course, like if you follow the toughest rules everywhere, then you must be compliant everywhere. But as Rocky has mentioned, the problem is that what we're seeing with regulations is it's not difference in degree, but it's really difference in kind. So I think as Janet touched on earlier, like if you look at the EU, the focus is on ex-ante regulation, what you have to do before your product even comes on the market. Whereas if you look at the US, it's more ex post and enforcement when stuff goes wrong. And in addition to that, what we're seeing out of the US is a lot of concerns that now I think fall under the bucket of national security. And so if you're addressing one set of concerns in one jurisdiction, it's really hard to say that, well, as long as you just increase the standard there, that you're gonna be able to address the concerns in all jurisdictions. And one problem that we see with over compliance is really there's a cost issue. If you try to follow the golden standard everywhere, then the cost of compliance is going to be very expensive because you're essentially picking the toughest standard, not only in one jurisdiction, but you're taking the toughest standard in one jurisdiction in one area, and then also following the toughest standard in another jurisdiction in another area, right? So the cost of compliance is going to be very expensive. Then you also have the issue of competitiveness. I mean, for AI companies, if you're going to try to follow the golden standard everywhere, are you going to be competitive, particularly with more local players, right? And lastly, again, if you follow compliance standards, the highest compliance standards, what you're really not addressing, which is becoming an issue of significant concern, particularly in the US, is national security, right? So if you are paying this extra for compliance, and you're talking about meeting the standards in the EU, are you really addressing the issues that are more significant in the U.S. market. And so, like when we advise clients, what I tell them is really, you really shouldn't shoot for having one standard apply across all jurisdictions and having that be like the highest standard. What you should really shoot for is to have a minimum foundation that cuts across all jurisdictions. And these are the compliance standards that you should expect everywhere. And then on top of that, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you can then add specific modules on top that address those specific issues in those jurisdictions. And that's probably the best way to go about it.
So more like a building blocks type scenario, right?
Yep.
I mean, you have the foundation model, and then you add stacks on top of it or different modules.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think Janet used the word modules. So that I think you have, like a base, and then depending on where you are, then you have different modules that you add on top of the base.
I think the one thing I've noticed, and I agree that's the way to build, the real difference between a modular architecture that succeeds and a modular architecture that is just as cumbersome is the enterprise's knowledge of its own compliance program. So what I mean by that is if 3 jurisdictions are imposing 3 different requirements on your transparency and labeling requirements or your data provenance requirements, the sophistication of the operational team that is looking at the training data or the provenance and then quickly able to make pragmatic calls such that, well, actually we can comply with 2 of those 3 the same, and it would be too risky for us to do the one the same, so we're going to do it another way. That's all driven by the incremental sophistication and the people taking those incredibly operational but complex calls.
Very cool. So, Greg, obviously we're always looking at this type of arbitrage, right? I mean, if you're going from jurisdictions or even markets, capital markets and so forth, how should companies think about regulatory arbitrage versus regulatory alignment? At what point does optimizing for one jurisdiction create unacceptable exposure in another one? So, almost like a cross-default clause, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to make it clear, we're talking about arbitrage in terms of, and I think we've touched upon these themes already with some of the prior comments about how do you look at jurisdictional requirements, regulatory requirements, as a point of market entry, and where do you kind of draw the line? What's the red lines in one jurisdiction versus the other? And then, as you mentioned, there's also the competitive challenge around applying too rigorous of a set of controls, the cost challenge around logging, and all the other challenges that come with maintaining a high level of compliance. So, I mean, it's really the best way to think about it is as a time horizon, and so. If you're an Asian AI company and you're looking at how do I get into Europe, how do I break into the US or other markets, one of the things that you can look at is, as of course we've talked about already, what is the minimum set of compliance obligations that will apply in all my jurisdictions, and then what are the areas and the jurisdictions where I might make, for competitive reasons and cost reasons, an early mover move to kind of build market share, do as you described, Janet, the kind of the red team, the trial run, if you will, so that other regulators can look back at what you've already seen and what controls you put in place, your operational maturity. There's no kind of rule of thumb. It really is for every organization to look at their own plan. One of the things that my team did, for example, was kind of the reverse. So we looked and helped as a risk-based engagement, one of the frontier models who was interested in entering, a variety of different Asian countries, and so they look specifically at each country, and we can talk about this in other examples later. But I mean, part of what they looked at was exactly this, which is what's the compliance obligation and what's the minimum standard.
Okay, this is not a loaded question. Is Hong Kong at the sort of the level that you would use as a trial, or is it one of those you kind of wait later?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I defer to other opinions, but I really think that Hong Kong is, and I don't just say that because I'm appealing to the local audience. I mean, the fact is, I do think Hong Kong is a good source of pilot. It is a kind of for many, especially non-regulated entities, it is an environment where unless you're in personal identifiable information, unless you're really concerned about the Privacy Act and you're taking a lot of consumer data, it's a fantastic place to operate from a regulatory standpoint. And so, yeah, there's a lot of really good reasons why it's a reasonable place to start.
Great. Janet, what are your thoughts on this topic?
So, I love a new regulation. I love a new regulation because...
I've never heard that ever.
I mean, I'm a lawyer. Love a new regulation. But I love new regulations across a single subject matter like AI, across different jurisdictions at roughly the same time with slightly different concepts, the apples to apples issue. Because it's an interesting strategic moment to choose where you're going to try to shoot your shot and convince a regulator of a position that's not exactly textual.
Because it's like almost like digital assets right now with, Hong Kong, US, Dubai, UAE, all these different jurisdictions vying for this. You like that part.
I love that part, and also because there's a stake in it for the regulator as well. If you're seen as kind of the reasonable regulator who a business-forward company, but still a compliance-forward company can negotiate with and come to a reasoned position on, that actually puts that regulator in an incredible position of authority in a field of new regulation.
Yeah, I mean, aside from attracting capital and foreign investment and all these, I mean, it's almost like regulation as a service, right?
Exactly.
It's like,
exactly.
In a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you set that first negotiation up for success, then as a company, I advise my clients they're in much better stead when they walk into a different regulator with an adjacent concept to say, these are the reasons we used to appeal for this outcome on implementation, this outcome on what a significant change or material change is. And here's why that we think that achieves your interest in our transparency, but allows us to launch a little bit more quickly than if we had to do a full risk assessment for every patch.
So, Will, obviously, kind of sharing a little bit about Cooley. I guess Cooley's done a ton of different deals, 450 AI deals in the last year, just because they're stationed out of Palo Alto and Silicon Valley. But, based on your experience, looking at the fast-scaling AI company, and if they had to choose, would they, this is maybe loaded, not loaded, delay U.S. market entry due to national security scrutiny, or delay EU entry due to compliance costs? How should they evaluate that trade-off strategically?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, Neil. I mean, first I would say that I think this is more a board business decision than a legal one. The issue that needs to be kind of fleshed out and ironed out before we get to the answer is really what's driving potential delay in these jurisdictions. Now, if the concern is really about cost of compliance, then that's something that in time you can overcome. But if we're talking about delay because there are concerns about structure, for example, that then go to national security issues, those are things that may be very difficult to address later on. And so I think you have to think about, like, what is it that is making you decide between one jurisdiction or the other? And oftentimes, we talk to clients and they just have very different concerns in terms of going into the various jurisdictions. And so you really have to weigh what is it that's giving you pause. One thing we tell clients is that if you're looking at the various jurisdictions, is which jurisdiction gives you the most opportunity from a revenue perspective, right? Because that's important. So commercially, which jurisdiction may make sense for you to go into first. If you're interested in, for example, a particular area, a particular customer base, well, that may sway you from one jurisdiction to another. And the second is what I would call reversibility, because there are some jurisdictions, well, like the EU, for instance, where you can maybe delay, and you can ultimately enter at a later date, because really the issues that you're dealing with are compliance, and compliance you can address with time, and you can address with money, and you can address with hiring people like us, like the people on this stage. The problem is if you have like national security issues and you let those issues linger, then you may cause concern with regulators that really cannot be reversed later on. And so you have to think about it in terms of what issues can wait, what jurisdiction can wait, and make your decision based on that. And the last thing I would say is, with regard to this issue, is just, it's important also to think about what you're signaling strategically, right? Because if you are if you are foregoing the U.S., I mean, that says a lot to your investors. That also says a lot to customers, because after all, the U.S. is still the biggest market out there. In addition, it's still the biggest capital markets opportunity, right? And there's a lot of ecosystem effects that you can gain by launching in the U.S. Whereas, if you're focused on a particular industry, maybe a regulated one, it may make sense to launch in Europe first, because your product is more aimed towards what the EU is regulating, and so you can think about it from that perspective. But really, I think it's one that each business has to decide on its own, and thinking about the different issues that they are facing uniquely.
Right. Rocky, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I do agree with Will, because other than kind of the legal compliance side, obviously the commercial side should take priority, because it's ultimately what products you want to develop, what services you want to provide, your target audience, your target market, where are your people now in a new
resources.
That's right. Where's the talent? Where's the capital? All those are very relevant. So I think now, of course, planning ahead, having the ability to maneuver between the recognizing the regulatory fragmentation nowadays in the world, that's important. But I see it's very important to keep in mind on the business side of things. We have seen cases before, the corporate that wants to target clients in a particular jurisdiction A. But then the regulation seems to be a bit more stringent, so they went to jurisdiction B, got the license, and tried to develop business cross-border basis with jurisdiction A. But the same regulatory issues comes by. So doing all that, it doesn't actually achieve the commercial objective. So they're now in jurisdiction B, and then, okay, let's do jurisdiction B business. So as long as
great for you, just keep working, right?
Excellent. Okay, so come back to A, or let's go to C. We're here to help. Yeah. But I think it's having that plan as long as it's on a known and informed basis, that's perfectly fine. But we see a lot of businesses, when they start off, they just went around the world. They went to B, they went to C, they went to D. But then ultimately they still want to do business in A. So they may, I just started in A and take the time and effort to get the regulatory or whatever legal regulatory compliance done. But if the thought is, okay, we thought about it, that's the plan. If I go to B, it doesn't work in A, fine. We stay in B, and then we have C and D as a backup plan. I think that foresight planning and make that informed decision is important.
Stuff. So actually transitioning more into data sovereignty, security, and infrastructure, Janet, with the data localization rules tightening in Europe, and scrutiny rising in the US on foreign access to data, is a globally unified model still viable, or are we heading towards fully regionalized AI stacks? What's your opinion on this?
I think Rocky made this call earlier on kind of the trend overall, and I think I agree with him. I think a global unified model is probably dead in the long run and possibly already dead. And it's already dead for regulated data, but I think the issue is, as we've seen in the US context, data regulation is happening with regard to how legislators are perceiving the importance of a single piece of data, but not, I think, contemplating the use case of that data. And so this is actually something I'll attribute to Neo, who was talking with us in the back room earlier. When I'm thinking about the bulk transfer rule in the United States, which went into effect last year and which essentially says, if you have US person data in certain categories, if you are sending it at a certain bulk, 10,000, 100,000, depending on what the category is, you may not do so to a state that is considered a national security risk for the United States. And China is among those countries. The data categories provided for under the bulk transfer rule include things like precise location history and personal health data. So, and the bulk data transfer rule follows that if you are exporting a set of data traversing those categories, and some of the thresholds are 100,000 and some are 1,000, you have to go with the lowest number, such that your attempt to transfer has to be as strict as the lowest capped data in your set. So what that implies is actually, it has huge implications for someone building a foot traffic app, someone who is looking to help people predict with AI technology when their next menstrual cycle might be, right? Like these are all cases where pseudonymized, anonymized, de-identified data from a particular geography isn't necessarily going to result, as far as I can tell, in a national security harm, and yet the regulation of that data set is absolute and vast. And so, you know, the thing that my clients worry about the most when we're talking about rules like this, when we're talking about data sovereignty rules, is algorithmic disgorgement. And what I mean by that is the ability of a regulator to look at a model trained and say, because you did so on the basis of impermissible data, and you cannot isolate the training based on the impermissible data, because once a model is trained, it is trained, you are no longer allowed to use this model. And so I think like that existential threat, which I don't think will be used lightly, but is certainly, for example, a tool available to the United States Federal Trade Commission in prosecuting and litigating unfair and deceptive practices cases. That is such a powerful deterrent and existential threat that I think there is no choice but to go fragmented.
Basically, it's like somebody that's allergic to peanuts and you put it into the recipe and you got to chuck the entire dish. That's what happened.
Your flair for analogy is excellent. Yes, it's very good.
Got it. So I think I'm going to go question by question now because I just, in the interest of time, because I want to make sure that we're covering some good territory here. So talking to Rocky, what are the most overlooked technical risks when companies try to separate data, models, and inference layers across jurisdictions? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so on this one, just again, a bit more context. Why do we want to segregate, and why do we need to separate the models, etc.? I think it derives again from the regulations, the requirements, but it also depends on the jurisdiction. Coming back to Hong Kong, again, depends on different regulators, regulated industries. Where Hong Kong stands is we actually don't need you to not prescriptive to be localized. What the regulator cares about, they do care, where you keep data, definitely. You need the approval. You need to show them where, okay, if I don't keep it in Hong Kong, I keep it somewhere else. You need the approval. It's possible. It's perfectly possible. There are requirements. What they really care is about the control and access. So when they need it, and they make sure when you need it, the regulatee, you are able to access that. So it should be at no time that you tell the regulator, I don't have the records, I can't access this. I need to wait till that jurisdiction to wake up or someone to let me access the information because I can provide it to you. So the access and control and the integrity protection of the data is what the Hong Kong regulator cares about. Also similar from a data perspective in Hong Kong. It's more about consent. So as long as you get the consent, you can do a lot of things. And of course, you need to protect data. Those are all good data protection policies. But from restrictions in terms of data traveling cross-border Hong Kong, there's a lot more flexibility. But certainly there will be some jurisdictions around the world that's more stringent, that requires specific restriction. We need to localize. Or there are a lot more you need to do before the data can go outside. So from that perspective, then we need to, okay, how do I comply with this? It's a global business. What am I going to do? Now, of course, there may not be a perfect solution, and it goes back to Neil, what you mentioned. Sometimes, even if we say, okay, I have this model data, my data is in jurisdiction A, my model is used in jurisdiction B, and live, it's only used by jurisdiction B, residents, so it shouldn't be a problem. But it goes back to what Janet mentioned. If the model builds on the data and trained by the data in jurisdiction A, with the regulators in jurisdiction A, wait, hold on a minute, while the data is still in jurisdiction A, since the model used the data and the model traveled to jurisdiction B, so the data travels together with B, the peanuts analogy. So that is an issue, and there may not be perfect solutions, and that's why I see the trend may be, it could be a regional fragmentation in terms of how we build our compliance system, how we build the data center, the hardware, software, and also the business model. Now, if it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction, obviously it's not commercially viable from a economy of scale perspective, but as a region or with certain common jurisdictions, I think that may be the trend that we are looking at.
Greg, obviously you're focused on cybersecurity. You guys are tip of the spear in this topic. From a cybersecurity perspective and national security lens, where do regulators draw the line between trusted vendor and unacceptable risk, and how predictable is that line for Asian firms? Because a lot of them are facing this issue exactly today, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I think we need to look at it from a technical and a geopolitical lens, if you will. I think, and that's how regulators will look at it. I think from a control standpoint, a regulator would assess technical controls, and by that I mean, obviously the secure development lifecycle, auditability, logging, third-party risk management, which is a huge sort of category of risk, obviously, even within AI. All of those things and the level of capability maturity need to be demonstratable and auditable, and have all of the same capability that we've been talking about all the last hour. But there's also the geopolitical perspective, which is a little bit more difficult to control for the company. We have to worry about the ownership of the company, who has access and influence over that company, and that's where geopolitical trust issues kind of tend to be revealed, and it may be less easy for a firm to kind of address that rather than the technical controls. So anyway, that's the issue.
So geopolitical, technical risks, what sort of dimensions do you apply to that? In terms of the different factors, can you share a little bit of the framework, if you will?
Yeah, I think I mean, we've been talking about the technical factors already this afternoon, and those hopefully are clear by now. I think there's a different, points of view we've already talked through fully. From an ownership perspective, I think opaque ownership structures, lack of clarity, lack of transparency is kind of the
Red
major
flag.
issue. Red flags, yeah. And so the other challenge that I've seen, especially in this space, and frankly just walking the exhibition floor, there's lots of partnerships, and that business partnership where you have an AI inference model or this fantastic AI-driven software model that is embedded and partnered with a hardware-based model, that combined solution then gets taken to market. Although they're two separate legal entities, all of that needs to be considered as part of the overall ecosystem of trust, if you will. Especially on the hardware side, the hardware is probably made up of a number of different hardware components. Each one of those could have its own sort of supplier, and that combined solution could be a connected product, which if you go into Europe, now you're potentially subjected to the Cyber Resilience Act, to the CRA. And so partnerships and third-party risk in this space, especially in AI, but almost every area of technologies, is a huge area. And so while you as a firm may have very clear, transparent ownership, the fact is your go-to-market may have ecosystem products that have less transparency.
So it almost goes into this AI, vendor assessment, vendor management perspective. It's like, you are the platform, but you have 10 other sort of substacks inside or microservices inside of it. You have to validate them all, or you have to vouch for them all, or at least have a pre-existing.
Absolutely, that's the issue.
Will, if compute, data, and talent are all geopolitically constrained, which one becomes the real bottleneck over the next 3 to 5 years, and how should companies hedge today? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, if you had asked me this question like 2 years ago, I would definitely have said compute. I mean, we have seen a lot of news about chips, and obviously the U.S. has implemented a lot of different regulations limiting the export of chips, and as I understand it, like the difference in the quality of the chips, that was pretty substantial a couple years back. But what companies here in Asia have shown is that the difference in compute can be made up via engineering and time. And recently, as I just saw a couple days ago, when we're comparing chips made in the US and chips made in Asia, the difference has shrunken from 30% to maybe like 3%. So really, when you look at the different factors that affect AI companies, it's becoming more clear that talent is really a more scarce resource. And with AI developing as fast as it has over the years, really companies and clients are looking for people with AI skills, and that is a very, very limited resource. So these days, I would say talent, because that's something that can't be the gap can't be closed, via time. And so these days, I think the most important is really when companies think about where they want to be located, very often they think about, well, why can't we just locate in one jurisdiction? But there are benefits to having like a multi-geography approach to talent, because talent can come from many different locations. So that's one thing that we talk to clients about. Like, do you really want to just locate in one in one country, because that could be limiting your pool of talent. Second, I would say with regard to talent, you should not think about it just as an HR issue. It's really a strategic issue, because if you have the right talent, then your company can grow substantially. And so you have to think about this is not just like an HR problem that our HR department can deal with, but it really should be an issue that management and the board is considering and thinking about. Now, also with talent, there's a limited, finite pool of people that are well-versed in AI right now. And so another thing that companies can think about is really growing homegrown these AI resources, developing them themselves internally, and are the companies focused on that? There's so much poaching going on in this industry right now, but really, if you want to have a sustainable business that has these, that is capable of exponential growth, then you really have to develop your own homegrown talent and grow your team from within.
But how does that even happen? I mean, in the Valley, aside from the fact that there was like an entire lawsuit about them body blocking everybody from like poaching others, I mean, there's no way to really kind of defend that position in that situation, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's hard to defend because right now there's just such a scarcity of talent, and so what's happening is that companies are paying talent a lot of money to go elsewhere, right? So that's the challenge that companies face. But at the same time, look, a lot of these AI folks really want to work at a place where they feel like they're growing something and they're at a company that they believe in. And so it's important that if you have talent, that, I mean, this is true of all organizations, that you make them feel like they belong, like you're actually investing in them, and that they feel like they're invested in the company. So these are all, it's important for every company, but I think it's particularly important for AI companies.
Great. So final question. I think we only have like 5 minutes left. So basically question to the panel. What's the key takeaway from this session? I mean, what do you guys see in the next 12 to 24 months that people need to be aware of in any sort of cross-border situation, whether it's to the U.S., to the U.K., Southeast Asia, or other, from a legal, regulatory compliance perspective? Janet, what are your thoughts?
I think narrative is probably something that is under-considered but important. Like, I remain convinced that a lot of the U.S. Restrictions that have now come to AI came through like a very compelling but somewhat misinformed narrative about how services like TikTok are able to gather the data of Americans and export them. So I think the idea of how to message the fact that AI is being built responsibly and there are greater gains to be made from lowering regional barriers, like narrative is going to be more important than maybe many people are accounting for.
Got it. Rocky, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think in terms of preparing, it's the regional fragmentation. Trying to have one structure that satisfy everything in the world will be aggressive. Now, that's certainly a possibility, but I think when we plan for things, leave the flexibility when we want to segregate, whether it's shareholding structure, operation structure, where your people are, keep that flexibility in mind.
Greg?
Yeah, I think, part of what we talked about here was an incredible amount of complexity about going to market across the world. And so if you're a Asian AI firm with aspirations of growth, with some initial success, with some great ideas, that innovation is valuable over the next 12 to 18 months. I would say, depending on who you are and the level of maturity you are, I would say double down on doing really, really well in the jurisdictions that you're most comfortable in terms of compliance and managing your risks, because there will be an incredible amount of a merger and acquisition and partnerships, et cetera. And so perhaps your best approach is to partner with someone else to help you take over the world in the future rather than do it yourself.
Got it. Will?
Well, I'll say regulatory compliance is critical to the success of AI companies, and that, I'm not saying that just because I'm a lawyer, but I think developments in the last couple of years have really proven that. And so really, the winners in the AI race aren't necessarily going to be the companies with just the best models, but it's really going to be the companies that have the flexibility and the agility to be able to function in different jurisdictions and to be able to adapt to the regulatory environment of those jurisdictions.
Thank you so much. So, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. This has been a fantastic discussion. Hopefully, you've gotten something out of it. Let's have a round of applause for this fantastic panel. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you to our speaker and moderator for an assembly session. Please stay for a group photo. Once again, thank you all for joining us today at the Aspire stage. Appreciate your full engagement and participation.